The thunder rolled across the Montana sky like God's own fury as Elena Blackwood rode through the valley, rain stinging her face, her horse's bare back slick beneath her. She had nothing. No saddle, no supplies, just the clothes on her back and a desperate will to survive. Through the downpour she spotted a light flickering in the distance, a lone ranch house standing defiant against the storm. Exhaustion threatening to claim her, Elena urged her horse forward. She didn't know if she could trust whoever waited inside, but she had run out of options. As she collapsed at the doorstep, barely conscious, a tall figure emerged from the warm light. The rancher knelt beside her, his weathered face showing concern rather than suspicion. "Stay," he said, his voice steady as the mountains themselves. "Courage needs a home. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." The storm had been raging for hours when Elena finally spotted the light. 3 days on the run, fleeing across the Montana territory with nothing but the clothes on her back and her father's prized mare. No saddle, no provisions. Those had been abandoned when the men started tracking her. The year was 1887, and the wilderness showed no mercy to a woman alone. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the valley below. For a moment, Elena could see the ranch house clearly, sturdy logs and a stone chimney, smoke curling despite the tempest. A barn stood nearby, and what looked like cattle pens. Civilization. Safety, perhaps. She wiped rain from her eyes, her fingers numb with cold. "Just a little farther, Willow," she whispered to the exhausted mare beneath her. The horse's sides heaved with effort, steam rising from her dark coat into the frigid night air. Elena had been riding bareback since dawn, her thighs raw and aching, her body one massive bruise. Thunder crashed directly overhead, and Willow reared, nearly throwing her rider. Elena clung to the horse's mane, her frozen fingers tangled in the wet strands. "Easy, girl," she soothed, though her own heart hammered wildly in her chest. Easy. The descent into the valley seemed eternal. Each minute stretched like an hour as the rain turned to hail, pelting woman and horse with merciless precision. Elena's threadbare coat offered little protection, the once fine fabric now sodden and torn. The elegant riding boots she'd fled in were cracked and splitting, her stockings long since shredded. When they finally reached the fence line, Elena's strength was failing. The light from the ranch house windows blurred before her eyes, doubling, then tripling as her consciousness wavered. She slid from Willow's back, her legs buckling as they hit the muddy ground. "Hello," she called, her voice thin against the howling wind. "Please, is anyone there?" For a moment, there was nothing. Then the door of the ranch house swung open, spilling golden lamplight into the yard. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the warmth, broad-shouldered and still. Elena tried to take a step forward, but her body had reached its limit. Her knees gave way, and she felt herself falling. The cold mud rushed up to meet her, but before she hit the ground, strong arms caught her, lifting her as if she weighed nothing at all. Miss, can you hear me?" The voice was deep, concerned, and undeniably male. Elena fought to focus on the face now inches from her own. Weathered skin, eyes the color of a summer sky, and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. "My horse," she managed, the words barely audible. "Please, take care of my horse." Then darkness claimed her entirely. Dreams and memories swirled through Elena's fevered mind. Her father's face, kind but worried as he urged her to run. The thunder of hoofbeats as her pursuers closed in. The crack of gunfire. The endless, punishing ride through territory she barely knew. She woke with a start. A scream caught in her throat. Sunlight streamed through unfamiliar windows, falling across a simple but clean room. She lay in a bed, a real bed with fresh linens, her ruined clothes replaced by a man's flannel shirt that swallowed her slender frame. "You're awake." Elena turned toward the voice, wincing as her stiff muscles protested. A woman stood in the doorway, perhaps 50 years old, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun. She carried a tray with what smelled like broth and fresh bread. "Where am I?" Elena asked, her voice a raspy whisper. "Pine Creek Ranch." The woman approached, setting the tray on a small table beside the bed. "I'm Martha Wilson." "You're safe now." "My horse." "The mare is fine. My son has her in the barn, fed and brushed and resting comfortable-like." Martha poured water from a pitcher into a cup and helped Elena sit up to drink. "You gave us quite a scare, young lady. Daniel found you half dead on our doorstep 2 nights ago." "2 nights?" Elena's hand trembled as she took the cup. "I've been unconscious for 2 days?" Martha nodded grimly. "The fever took hold, something fierce. Whatever you were running from, it nearly killed you getting away." Elena lowered her gaze, unwilling to confirm or deny the woman's assessment. "Thank you for your kindness, Mrs. Wilson. I can't pay you, but once I'm well enough to travel—" "Hush now." Martha's tone brooked no argument. "You're not going anywhere until you've got your strength back. Dr. Simmons says you're suffering from exhaustion and exposure. Could have been pneumonia if Daniel hadn't found you when he did." As if summoned by his name, a man appeared in the doorway, the same broad-shouldered figure from Elena's fragmented memories of the storm. In daylight, she could see him clearly, tall and powerfully built, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes that reminded her of the Montana sky after a storm had passed. His light brown hair was slightly too long, curling at the edges of his collar. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "You're awake." His voice was just as she remembered, deep and steady. He remained in the doorway, as if unwilling to intrude. "How are you feeling, Miss Blackwood?" Elena supplied after a moment's hesitation. "Elena Blackwood." "Daniel Wilson." He nodded once, his expression revealing nothing. "Your mare's doing fine. Spirited animal. Quality bloodlines. She was my father's." The words caught in Elena's throat. Was. Past tense. The reality of her situation crashed over her anew. Something in Daniel's eyes softened, as if he'd caught the grief in her voice. "She's a credit to him," he said simply. "Carried you through that storm when lesser horses would have faltered." Martha cleared her throat. "Daniel, let the girl eat while her food's hot. You can interrogate her later." "I wasn't." He stopped himself, the corner of his mouth twitching in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Yes, Ma. I'll be in the north pasture if you need me." With a final nod to Elena, he was gone. Martha sighed, shaking her head fondly. "My son's not much for conversation, but he's got a good heart. Now eat up. You need your strength." The broth was rich and savory, the bread still warm from the oven. Elena hadn't realized how desperately hungry she was until the first spoonful touched her lips. She ate with as much dignity as she could muster, though her hands shook with weakness. "Mrs. Wilson," she said when the bowl was half empty, "I don't want to be a burden. Once I'm able, I can work to repay your kindness." Martha studied her with shrewd eyes. "You're running from something, or someone. No need to confirm or deny. We all have our secrets out here. But you should know, this is isolated country. Nearest town is Clearwater, 20 miles east. Not much there but a general store, a saloon, and a handful of homesteaders trying to scratch out a living." "That's good," Elena murmured. "Isolated is good." Martha's expression remained neutral. "Well, you rest now. We can talk about arrangements once you're steady on your feet." The next few days passed in a haze of sleep and gradual recovery. Elena's strength returned slowly, each day bringing more clarity and less pain. Martha provided her with a simple dress that had belonged to Daniel's sister, now married and living in Bozeman. "Rebecca was always more slight than me," Martha explained as she helped Elena into the faded blue calico. "Still might be a bit large on you, but it's better than my son's shirt." On the 4th day, Elena felt strong enough to venture downstairs. The Wilson home was modest but comfortable, a large main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen with a cast-iron stove, and a small dining area. Books lined one wall, surprising Elena with their number and variety. Daniel's father was a great reader, Martha explained when she caught Elena examining the shelves. Taught at a school back east before the war, Daniel inherited his love of books. Elena ran her fingers along the spines. Shakespeare, Thoreau, Whitman, and dozens of others. "My father was the same," she said softly. "He believed education was the greatest gift he could give me. A wise man." Martha set a cup of coffee before her, and apparently one who taught his daughter to ride like the wind. Elena accepted the cup with a grateful smile, though her heart ached at the mention of her father. He said a woman should always be able to make a swift exit if necessary. Sound advice. Martha didn't press further, but her eyes held questions Elena wasn't ready to answer. It was nearly evening when Daniel returned to the house, his clothes dusty from a day's work, his face windburned and tired. He stopped short at the sight of Elena sitting by the fire, clearly surprised to find her out of bed. "Miss Blackwood," he said with a nod, "good to see you up and about." "Thanks to your mother's excellent care," Elena replied, suddenly conscious of her borrowed dress and uncombed hair. "And thanks to you for finding me that night. I owe you my life, Mr. Wilson." He shrugged off the gratitude, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "Anyone would have done the same." "Not anyone," Elena said quietly. "Not everyone shows kindness to strangers." Something flickered in his eyes at that, a shadow of understanding, perhaps. Before he could respond, Martha called them to dinner, a simple but hearty meal of venison stew and cornbread. The conversation was sparse at first, until Martha began asking gentle questions about Elena's background. With careful omissions, Elena shared that she had grown up in St. Louis, that her mother had died when she was young, and that her father had been a professor of literature who had recently passed away. "I'm sorry for your loss," Daniel said, his first contribution to the conversation. "Losing a parent is hard." "Speaking from experience," Martha added, patting her son's hand. "Daniel's father died 5 years ago. Influenza took him in the winter of '82. Elena nodded, grateful for their understanding. "After my father died, I had few options. The university didn't continue his pension." This much was true, though it was far from the whole story. "And so you came west," Martha prompted. "Yes." Elena stared into her bowl. "For a fresh start." "On horseback? Alone? Through some of the most dangerous territory in Montana?" Daniel's tone wasn't accusatory, merely puzzled. "That's not a fresh start, Miss Blackwood. That's a desperate flight." "Daniel," his mother warned. "It's all right, Mrs. Wilson." Elena met Daniel's gaze steadily. "Your son is right to question. In his position, I would do the same. But I'm not ready. I can't talk about it yet." Daniel held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. "Fair enough. Your business is your own." He returned to his meal, the subject closed, at least for now. After dinner, Daniel excused himself to check on the livestock one final time before dark. Elena helped Martha with the dishes, her hands still weak but eager for useful occupation. "He doesn't trust easily," Martha said as they worked. "Daniel, I mean. The war changed him. He came back different, quieter." "He fought in the war between the states?" Elena asked, surprised. Daniel didn't seem old enough. "Just at the end. Lied about his age to enlist when he was 16. Saw things no boy should see." Martha sighed. "When he came home, he threw himself into building this ranch. Works from sunup to sundown most days." "You're proud of him?" "Every day." Martha smiled. "He's a good man, my Daniel. Just takes time to warm up to strangers." Later, as Elena prepared to return upstairs, she paused by the window. Outside, the moon illuminated the yard, casting long shadows across the freshly rain-washed earth. Daniel stood by the corral, one hand extended toward Willow, who sniffed his palm cautiously before allowing him to stroke her neck. The sight stirred something in Elena's chest. Gratitude, yes, but something else too. Something warm and unexpected that she quickly pushed aside. She had no room for such feelings, not when her future remained so uncertain. In the morning, Elena woke early, determined to make herself useful. She found Martha in the kitchen, already preparing breakfast. "Please, let me help," she insisted. "I've imposed on your hospitality too long already." Martha assessed her with a critical eye. "You're still pale as milk, but I won't turn down an extra pair of hands. You can knead that dough while I see to the eggs." They worked in companionable silence, the familiar tasks bringing Elena a measure of comfort. She had just finished setting the table when Daniel entered, bringing with him the crisp scent of the morning air. "Miss Blackwood," he greeted her, surprise evident in his voice. "You shouldn't be exerting yourself so soon." "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Wilson," she replied, "and I was raised to earn my keep." Something like approval flickered across his features. As were we all. He hung his hat and washed his hands at the basin. "Your mare seems to be recovering her spirits. Tried to take a bite out of me this morning." Elena smiled despite herself. "Willow can be particular about who she allows close. She was my father's pride, one of the few things I could bring with me when—" She stopped abruptly, realizing she'd nearly revealed too much. Daniel's gaze sharpened, but he didn't press. Instead, he took his seat at the table as Martha brought over a platter of eggs and bacon. "I'm heading into Clearwater today," he said as they began to eat. "Need supplies, and there are letters to post." "Would you stop by Dr. Simmons's office?" Martha asked. "Ask him if he has any more of that willow bark tonic. My joints are feeling the change in weather." Daniel nodded, then glanced at Elena. "Is there anything you need from town, Miss Blackwood?" The question caught her off guard. What did she need? Everything and nothing. She had no money, no possessions beyond Willow and the clothes she'd arrived in, now cleaned and mended by Martha's skillful hands. "No, thank you," she said finally. "You've both been more than generous already." After breakfast, Elena watched from the porch as Daniel hitched the wagon. The morning sun caught in his hair, turning it to burnished gold. He worked with efficient movements, his strength evident but never showy. When he finished, he approached the porch, his expression inscrutable. "I should be back by sundown," he told her. "If anyone comes by—" He hesitated. "You don't need to worry, Mr. Wilson," Elena assured him, understanding his unspoken concern. "I have no desire to bring trouble to your door. If anyone asks, I'm just a distant cousin, visiting from back east." He studied her for a long moment. "Are you in danger, Miss Blackwood?" The direct question startled her. "I hope not anymore." "Not here." Daniel nodded slowly. "This land has its own rules. People mind their business, for the most part. But secrets have a way of finding daylight, especially ones that arrive in the middle of a storm." "I understand." Elena straightened her shoulders. "And I promise, as soon as I'm able, I'll move on. You and your mother won't have to concern yourselves with my secrets much longer." Something like disappointment crossed his face so quickly she might have imagined it. "That wasn't my meaning." He cleared his throat. "Just wanted to say, you're safe here. Whatever you're running from, it won't find you at Pine Creek Ranch." With that, he touched the brim of his hat and turned away, climbing into the wagon with fluid grace. Elena watched until he disappeared down the long drive, dust rising behind the wagon wheels like phantom trails in the morning light. The day passed quietly. Elena helped Martha with household chores, pacing herself as her strength allowed. They hung laundry in the yard, the clean sheets snapping in the breeze like sails. Martha showed her the vegetable garden, the chicken coop, the root cellar, dug into the hillside behind the house. Daniel's father started this place with nothing but a tent and a dream, Martha told her as they picked beans for dinner. Everyone said he was crazy, trying to ranch in this valley. Too isolated, they said. Too hard to get supplies in and cattle out. But he proved them wrong, Elena observed, looking at the prosperous homestead around them. James Wilson was nothing if not stubborn, Martha said with a fond smile. Daniel's just like him, sets his mind to something and won't quit until it's done. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, promising another storm. Martha glanced anxiously toward the road as she and Elena prepared dinner. Daniel should have been back by now, she muttered, checking the window for the third time in as many minutes, unless he got delayed in town. Elena sensed there was more to the older woman's concern than simple weather. "Does the road flood in heavy rain?" she asked. Martha hesitated. "No, it's not that. There's been trouble lately. Cattle rustlers working the area, and worse." "Worse?" "Land grabbers." Martha's voice hardened. "Eastern money men trying to buy up ranches, or force folks out if they won't sell. They've hired guns, men with no conscience. 2 homesteaders north of here were burned out last month. Elena felt her blood run cold. And they've threatened you? You and Daniel? Not directly. Martha turned back to the stove, stirring the stew with unnecessary vigor. But Pine Creek has the best water rights in the valley. James knew what he was doing when he claimed this land. Now others want it, and they're not particular about how they get it. The implications settled heavily on Elena's shoulders. She had fled one danger only to land in the midst of another. Yet something inside her rebelled at the thought of these kind people facing threats alone. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "You have enough problems without taking in a stranger with troubles of her own." Martha turned to her, eyes fierce with maternal protectiveness. "Now you listen to me, Elena Blackwood. In this life we help where we can, when we can. My Daniel didn't hesitate to bring you in from that storm, and I won't hear a word about you being a burden. Understood?" Chastened and touched, Elena nodded. "Yes, ma'am." The storm broke just as darkness fell, rain lashing the windows as wind howled around the eaves. Martha lit extra lamps, their warm glow a defiant stand against the gathering gloom. Still, there was no sign of Daniel. "He might have decided to stay in town," Martha said, though her tone suggested she didn't believe it. "The road gets treacherous in weather like this." Elena stood by the window, peering into the darkness. Lightning flashed, illuminating the yard for a brief, stark moment. In that instant, she saw something, a movement at the edge of the property, near the tree line. A horse and rider barely visible through the downpour. "Mrs. Wilson," she said urgently. "I think someone's out there." Martha joined her at the window, squinting into the night. Another flash of lightning revealed the rider more clearly, not Daniel on the wagon, but a single horseman, sitting motionless just beyond the fence line. "Who'd be out in this?" Martha whispered, her face pale in the lamplight. Elena felt her heart begin to race, old fears clawing at her throat. Had they found her? Had she led danger straight to the Wilsons' door? Before she could speak, the sound of wagon wheels cut through the storm's fury. Moments later, Daniel's team pulled into the yard, his tall figure hunched against the rain as he guided the horses toward the barn. "Thank God," Martha breathed, hurrying to the door. "Daniel! Daniel, there's a rider by the south pasture." Daniel's head snapped up, his hand moving instinctively to his side where Elena now saw he wore a holstered revolver. He scanned the darkness, then called back, "Get inside, Ma! Lock the door!" Martha hesitated, clearly torn between obeying her son and worrying for his safety. Elena took the older woman's arm gently but firmly. "Come, Mrs. Wilson. Daniel knows what he's doing." They retreated inside, securing the door as instructed. Through the window, they watched as Daniel unhitched the team with practiced speed, his movements economic despite the driving rain. The mysterious rider remained at the edge of the property, visible only when lightning split the sky. "Should we get a weapon?" Elena asked, her voice low. Martha nodded grimly, retrieving a shotgun from a cabinet near the fireplace. James always said a woman should know how to protect her home. She checked the weapon with competent hands. "Daniel taught me after his father passed." The minutes stretched like hours as they waited, the storm's fury intensifying around them. Finally, the back door opened, and Daniel strode in, rain streaming from his duster. His face was grim as he shed the wet garment. "Ryder's gone," he reported, running a hand through his soaked hair. "Couldn't get a good look at him." "Thank heavens you're back," Martha said, setting aside the shotgun to embrace her son. "We were worried sick. Got delayed in town." Daniel's eyes moved to Elena, something unreadable in their depths. There was talk in Clearwater. Strangers asking questions about a young woman traveling alone. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. What kind of questions? Whether anyone had seen a dark-haired woman on a black mare. Daniel's voice was level, but his gaze was intent. "They're offering a reward for information. Saying she's a runaway ward, unstable, in need of her guardian's protection." "Guardian!" The word made bile rise in Elena's throat. "That's not true," she whispered. "None of it is true." "I didn't think it was." Daniel crossed to the fire, holding his hands out to the warmth. These men didn't have the look of concerned guardians, more like hired guns. Martha made a small, distressed sound. Did anyone in town say anything? Far as anyone in Clearwater knows, we haven't seen any strangers. Daniel turned to face them both, his expression resolute. And that's how it's going to stay. But, Elena began. You're not going anywhere, Daniel said firmly. Not in this weather, and not with those men searching the territory. I can't put you in danger, Elena protested. If they find me here, they won't. The certainty in his voice was absolute. Pine Creek Ranch stands by its own. Martha nodded in agreement. Daniels, right, you're staying, Elena. Emotion welled in Elena's throat, gratitude, fear, and something else she couldn't name. Why would you do this? You barely know me. Daniel's eyes held hers, steady as the mountains themselves. I know enough, he said simply. I know you rode bareback through a storm rather than stay wherever you were. I know fear when I see it, and courage too. And I know that sometimes courage needs a home. In that moment, as thunder rolled across the Montana sky and rain lashed against the windows, Elena Blackwood felt something shift inside her. A tiny flame of hope, fragile but undeniable, in a heart she'd thought had forgotten how to hope at all. The days that followed brought an uneasy peace to Pine Creek Ranch. The storm had passed, leaving behind a washed, clean world of startling clarity. Elena found herself settling into the rhythm of ranch life with surprising ease, her strength returning more each day. She rose before dawn to help Martha with breakfast, learned to collect eggs without getting pecked, and even tried her hand at bread making, though her first attempts were less than perfect. You've got a gentle touch, Martha observed as they worked side by side in the kitchen. Most city folks handle eggs like they're made of iron. Elena smiled, pleased by the small compliment. My father believed in self-reliance. He said a person should know how to feed themselves, regardless of their station. A wise man, Martha nodded approvingly. Too many young women these days are raised to be ornamental. Ornamental. The word stirred uncomfortable memories. Elena had been raised to think, to question, to stand on her own 2 feet. Values that had ultimately put her at odds with the man who claimed to be her guardian. Outside the kitchen window, she could see Daniel working in the corral with Willow. The mare had recovered her spirits, perhaps too well. She pranced and tossed her head, resisting the saddle Daniel was attempting to place on her back. She's stubborn as her mistress, Martha chuckled, following Elena's gaze. Daniel's good with horses, though, patient. He'll win her over. As if hearing them, Daniel glanced toward the house. When he saw Elena watching, he raised a hand in greeting. She returned the gesture, a strange warmth spreading through her chest. He doesn't smile often, Martha said quietly. Not since the war, but he smiled more since you came. Elena felt her cheeks flush. Mrs. Wilson, Martha, please. We're past formalities, I think. Martha, Elena amended. I don't want to give the wrong impression. I'm grateful for your kindness, both of you, but I can't stay here forever. The older woman's face grew serious. Because of the men looking for you. Elena nodded, her throat tight. They won't stop searching, and I won't bring danger to your door. Danger finds its own way, Martha said, her voice matter of fact. Has nothing to do with you being here or not. This territory's been getting more lawless by the month. Land grabbers, cattle thieves. It was just a matter of time before trouble came calling. All the more reason I shouldn't add to your worries. Martha fixed her with a stern look. Elena Blackwood, in my experience, having one more capable person around when trouble comes is never a bad thing. And you strike me as plenty capable. Before Elena could respond, the kitchen door opened and Daniel entered, bringing with him the scent of leather and horses. That mare of yours, he said without preamble, has opinions about everything. Despite herself, Elena laughed. Willow was a gift to my father from a Turkish diplomat. Apparently, she comes from a line of horses bred for desert princes. Aristocratic blood. Well, Her Highness has finally consented to wear a saddle, Daniel reported, washing his hands at the basin. Though she made it clear it was her idea, not mine. "You've made progress then," Elena said. "Thank you for taking such care with her." Daniel shrugged, though his eyes warmed at her gratitude. "Horse like that deserves respect. She carried you through hell to get here." The simple acknowledgement of what she'd endured, without prying questions or judgment, touched Elena deeply. "Yes," she said softly. She did. After lunch, Daniel surprised her by asking if she felt strong enough for a short ride. "Thought you might like to see more of the ranch," he explained, "if you're up to it." Elena's heart leapt at the prospect of being in the saddle again, a feeling that sense of freedom that had always come with riding. "I'd like that very much." Martha packed them a small basket with canteens of water and slices of the apple cake she'd baked that morning. "Don't overdo it," she cautioned Elena. "You're still recovering." The afternoon sun was warm but not uncomfortable as they rode side by side, Daniel on his bay gelding and Elena astride Willow, who seemed pleased to be reunited with her mistress. They followed a trail that wound alongside the creek, wildflowers nodding in the gentle breeze. "Your father named the ranch well," Elena observed, gesturing to the pine trees that crown the surrounding hills. "It's beautiful here." Daniel nodded, his eyes scanning the landscape with evident pride. Pa had a vision. Said this valley reminded him of a place in Virginia. Before the war changed everything, he wanted to build something lasting. "And you've carried on his work." "Trying to." A shadow crossed his features. "Not easy these days. Big cattle operations moving in, squeezing out smaller ranchers. Then there's the railroad coming. Changes everything." "Change isn't always bad," Elena offered. "The railroad means access to markets, doesn't it?" Daniel gave her a considering look. "You know something about business?" "My father was a professor, but he invested wisely. He taught me to read financial papers, understand markets." She smiled wryly. "Not typical education for a young lady, I know. Nothing typical about you, Miss Blackwood." There was respect in his voice and something else, a warmth that made her pulse quicken. They stopped at a high meadow overlooking the valley, dismounting to let the horses graze. Daniel spread his coat on a flat rock for Elena to sit, then unpacked Martha's basket. They ate in companionable silence, the view before them worth more than any words. Finally, Daniel spoke. "Those men in town, the ones looking for you, want to tell me why?" Elena tensed, though she'd been expecting the question. "It's complicated. Usually is." He didn't press, just waited, his blue eyes patient. Taking a deep breath, Elena chose her words carefully. "After my father died, I discovered he'd named a colleague as my guardian, Professor James Harrington. A man I'd known since childhood, respected even, but once he had legal control," she shuddered, "he changed, or perhaps he showed his true nature." Daniel's expression darkened. "Did he hurt you?" "Not physically." Elena stared at her hands. "But he made it clear what my future held. He'd arranged a marriage to a man 3 times my age, a wealthy donor to the university. When I refused, Harrington reminded me that I had no choice. Legally, I was his ward until I married or turned 25. How old are you now?" 22. Elena raised her chin. "I couldn't bear the thought of being sold like property. So one night, I took what little money my father had left me, saddled Willow, and fled. I thought I'd escaped clean, but Harrington must have hired men to track me." Daniel was silent for a long moment. "You rode all the way from St. Louis? Alone?" Elena nodded. "Not directly. I zigzagged, took back roads, avoided towns when I could, slept rough most nights." A bitter smile twisted her lips. "The life of a fugitive wasn't part of my finishing school education. Yet here you are." There was unmistakable admiration in his voice. "That took courage." "Or desperation." Elena met his gaze. "I don't regret leaving, but I never intended to bring trouble to innocent people. If those men track me here, let them try." Daniel's jaw set in a hard line. "Pine Creek is our home. Nobody's taking that from us. Not land grabbers, not hired guns, not your so-called guardian. Why would you risk yourselves for me? You barely know me." Daniel looked away, his profile strong against the afternoon sky. "When I came back from the war, I wasn't right. Saw too much, too young, couldn't sleep without nightmares. could barely function. His voice grew rough with memory. One night, I rode out in a storm, not caring if I came back or not. Pa found me, half frozen, brought me home. Know what he said? Elena shook her head. He said, "Sometimes courage needs a home, son. A place to heal, to remember itself." Daniel turned back to her, his eyes intense. "That's what Pine Creek was for me. Maybe it can be that for you, too." Something broke open inside Elena's chest, a dam holding back emotions she'd refused to acknowledge. Tears filled her eyes, though she fought to contain them. "I don't know if I'm brave," she whispered. "Most days I feel like I'm just running scared." Running scared would have been marrying that old man, living a life that killed your spirit. Daniel's hand covered hers, warm and calloused. "You chose the harder path. That's courage, plain and simple." The touch of his hand, the certainty in his voice. They anchored her in a way she hadn't experienced since her father died. For the first time in months, Elena felt something like peace. The moment was broken by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Daniel was on his feet instantly, his relaxed demeanor replaced by vigilant alertness. He moved to the edge of the meadow, shading his eyes against the sun. "Riders?" he said tersely. "3 of them, coming up the main road." Elena's heart lurched painfully. "Harrington's men?" "Can't tell yet." Daniel was already gathering their things, his movements efficient but unhurried. "But we're not taking chances. There's a hunting cabin about a mile north of here. I'm taking you there." "What about Martha? I can't leave her alone if those men—" "Ma knows what to do. We've had a signal worked out for years." Daniel helped Elena to her feet, his hands steady on her shoulders. "Trust me, Elena. I won't let anything happen to you." The calm certainty in his voice steadied her racing pulse. She nodded once. "I trust you." They mounted quickly, Daniel leading them through a stand of pines and up a narrow trail that wound into the hills. Elena glanced back once, catching a glimpse of 3 distant figures on horseback approaching the ranch house. Fear clawed at her throat, but she forced it down, focusing instead on following Daniel's lead. The hunting cabin was little more than a one-room shelter, built against a rocky outcropping, well hidden among the trees. A small stream gurgled nearby, providing water. Inside was sparse but serviceable. A bed, a table with 2 chairs, a small stove. "Pa built this years ago," Daniel explained as he unsaddled the horses and secured them in a lean-to behind the cabin. "Good place to wait out bad weather or spend the night during hunting season." "Will Martha be safe?" Elena couldn't keep the worry from her voice. "Ma can handle herself," Daniel assured her, checking the rifle he'd taken from a rack on the wall. "And those men, if they're who we think they are, won't find what they're looking for." "How can you be sure?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Because Caleb Jenkins is staying with Ma right now. He rode in just before we left for our ride. You were changing into your riding clothes. He's young, but he's loyal and good with a gun. He'll make sure Ma's protected." Relief flooded through Elena. "You didn't mention that." "Didn't want to worry you unnecessarily." Daniel peered through the cabin's small window, which offered a view down the hillside toward the ranch. "I can see them. They're talking to Ma on the porch." Elena joined him at the window, her heart in her throat. From this distance, the figures were small, but she could make out Martha's straight-backed posture as she faced the 3 mounted men. A 4th figure, presumably Caleb, stood slightly behind her. "What do we do now?" Elena asked. "We wait," Daniel replied. "See what they do. If they leave peacefully, fine. If not—" His hand tightened on the rifle. The minutes crawled by like hours. Elena paced the small cabin, unable to keep still, while Daniel maintained his vigil at the window. Finally, he straightened. "They're leaving," he reported, heading back down the road. Just like that. Elena couldn't believe it would be so simple. Daniel's expression remained grim. "They'll be back. Men like that don't give up easily. But they won't find you tonight." As darkness fell, they remained at the cabin, Daniel deeming it safer than returning to the ranch immediately. He built a small fire in the stove, the warmth pushing back against the mountain chill. They shared the remainder of Martha's cake and water from the stream, making a simple meal. "Tell me about your father," Daniel said as they sat by the stove's glow. "What kind of man was he?" The question caught Elena off guard, but she found herself wanting to share. "He was brilliant, kind, always more interested in ideas than practical matters. My mother used to say his head was in the clouds, but his heart was firmly on earth." She smiled at the memory. "He taught me to think for myself, to question everything. Said the greatest gift he could give me was the courage to form my own opinions." "Sounds like a man worth knowing," Daniel observed. "You favor him?" "So people said. We shared the same love of books, the same curiosity." Elena's smile faded. "After Mother died, it was just the two of us. He turned down prestigious positions to stay in St. Louis, where her family could help raise me." "And Harrington? How did he enter the picture?" Elena's expression hardened. "He was my father's colleague, younger, ambitious. I think my father saw him as the son he never had, trusted him implicitly." She shook her head bitterly. "He never saw Harrington's true nature. How could he? The man only showed his colors after father was gone." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Some men wear masks their whole lives, only show their true face when they think they can get away with it." "Yes," Elena whispered. "That's exactly it." As the night deepened, practical matters asserted themselves. The cabin had only one bed, narrow but adequate for one person. "You take it," Daniel said firmly. "I'll keep watch." Elena wanted to protest, but exhaustion weighed heavily on her. The day's emotions, the fear and tension, they had drained what little reserve she'd built up during her recovery. Still, she hesitated. "You need rest too," she said. "We could share?" "Just to sleep," she added quickly, heat rising to her cheeks. A flush of color touched Daniel's tanned face, but he shook his head. "Wouldn't be proper, and you deserve your privacy." His tone was gentle but final. "I've slept in worse places than a cabin floor. Army teaches you to rest where you can." Too tired to argue, Elena settled onto the bed, pulling a rough woolen blanket over herself. She expected sleep to elude her, but exhaustion claimed her almost immediately. She woke in darkness, momentarily disoriented. The fire in the stove had died down to embers, casting just enough light to see Daniel seated by the window, his rifle across his knees, alert and watchful. "Everything all right?" she asked softly. He turned, his face half in shadow. "All quiet. Go back to sleep." Instead, Elena rose, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders against the night chill. She crossed to the window, standing beside him. "You should rest. I can watch for a while." "I'm fine." His voice was low, a rumble in the darkness, used to long nights. They stood in silence, looking out at the star-strewn sky. The moon hung low over the mountains, painting the landscape in silver and shadow. "Beautiful," Elena murmured. "Yes." But when she glanced at Daniel, he wasn't looking at the view. He was looking at her, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. Something shifted between them in that moment, a current passing through the stillness of the cabin. Elena found herself acutely aware of his closeness, the warmth radiating from his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "Daniel," she began, though she wasn't sure what she wanted to say. The sound of his name on her lips seemed to break something loose in him. His hand came up to touch her cheek, calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Elena," he said, just her name, but it held a world of meaning. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned toward her. His lips met hers in a kiss so tender it made her heart ache, a question, not a demand. Elena answered by leaning into him, her hands finding the solid strength of his shoulders. When they broke apart, both were breathing faster. Daniel rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "I shouldn't have done that," he whispered. "Why not?" Her voice was steadier than she felt. "You're under my protection. It's not right to—" "I'm not under your protection," Elena interrupted, drawing back to look into his face. "I'm standing beside you. There's a difference." His eyes searched hers, looking for certainty. Whatever he saw there made him nod slowly. Yes, he agreed. There is. Before either could say more, a flicker of light in the distance caught their attention. Daniel tensed, moving Elena gently but firmly behind him as he peered out the window. Torches, he said grimly. 3, maybe 4, heading up from the direction of the ranch. Fear gripped Elena's heart. Martha? Look there! Daniel pointed to a spot behind the approaching torches. A single lantern burned on the ranch house porch, swinging slowly in a deliberate pattern. That's our signal. Ma's safe, but she's warning us. Those men are coming our way. How did they know where to look? Elena's mind raced. The cabin isn't visible from the road. Daniel's expression hardened. Someone talked. Someone in town who knows about this place. He grabbed his coat, checking the rifle's ammunition. We need to move, now. Where? If they're between us and the ranch. There's another way down the mountain. An old mining trail. Steep, but passable. He handed her her coat. If we can reach it before they spot us, we can circle around, get back to the ranch from the north. Elena's heart pounded as she shrugged into her coat and followed Daniel out into the night. The horses sensed their tension, ears pricked forward as Daniel quickly saddled them. Stay close to me, he instructed as they mounted. The trail's narrow in places. One wrong step could mean a bad fall. They set off at a careful walk, Daniel leading the way through the trees. Elena glanced back once, seeing the bobbing torches growing closer to the cabin they'd just abandoned. The night was still, sound carrying clearly across the mountainside. She could hear men's voices now, rough and determined. "We know you're up here, girl!" One called. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be!" Daniel signaled for silence, guiding them deeper into the forest. The path grew steeper, winding between massive pines and rocky outcroppings. Willow picked her way carefully, seeming to understand the need for quiet. Elena leaned forward, stroking the mare's neck in silent thanks. They had almost reached the old mining trail when a shout rang out behind them. "There! On the ridge!" A gunshot cracked through the night, the bullet splintering bark from a tree near Elena's head. Willow reared in alarm, nearly unseating her. "Ride!" Daniel commanded, spurring his gelding forward. "Don't stop for anything." Elena needed no urging. She gave Willow her head, trusting the sure-footed mare to follow Daniel's mount down the treacherous trail. Behind them, more shots rang out, but the darkness and trees made accurate aim impossible. The old mining trail was little more than a rocky track cutting steeply down the mountainside. In daylight, it would have been challenging. By moonlight, it was perilous. Elena focused on staying in the saddle, on trusting Willow's instincts, on following the dark shape of Daniel ahead of her. Halfway down, disaster struck. Daniel's horse stumbled on loose shale, going down hard. Daniel threw himself clear, rolling away from the flailing hooves, but the gelding scrambled to its feet with a panicked whinny, bolting back up the trail. "Daniel!" Elena reined Willow to a halt, horror flooding her as she saw him lying motionless on the ground. Above them, their pursuers had heard the commotion. Shouts and the crashing of brush indicated they were closing in. Elena dismounted in a single fluid motion, rushing to Daniel's side. To her immense relief, he was already pushing himself up, grimacing in pain. "My leg," he grunted. "Twisted it in the fall. Not broken, but—" He broke off as another gunshot echoed above them. "You need to go. Now. Take Willow and get to the ranch." "Warn Ma." "I'm not leaving you," Elena said fiercely. "Don't be foolish. They're after you, not me. If you stay, we both lose. And if I leave, you die." Elena's voice was steel. "No." "There's another way." She helped him to his feet, supporting his weight as he tested his injured leg. "Can you ride?" Daniel nodded tightly, pain evident in his expression. "Not well, but yes." "Good." Elena whistled for Willow, who trotted to her side obediently. With Daniel's help, she removed the saddle, working quickly in the dim light. "You take Willow. I'll lead them away." "What? No, Elena." "Listen to me," she cut him off. "Those men know my horse. They're looking for a woman on a black mare. I'll take the saddle, make them think I'm heading east along the ridge. You go bareback on Willow down to the ranch. She'll get you there safely." "It's too dangerous," Daniel protested. "If they catch you, they won't." Elena's voice held a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "I grew up riding these same hills outside St. Louis. I know how to lose a pursuit." She pressed Willow's reins into his hands. "Trust me, Daniel. Like I trusted you." Their eyes met in the moonlight, a world of unspoken feelings passing between them. Finally, Daniel nodded. "Be careful," he said hoarsely. "Come back to me." "I will." Elena reached up, pulling his face down to hers for a swift, fierce kiss. "That's a promise." With Daniel's help, she hoisted the saddle onto her shoulder. It was heavy, but she could manage for the short distance she needed. "Wait 5 minutes," she instructed. "Then take the trail down. Stay in the trees as much as possible." "Elena." Daniel caught her hand as she turned to go. "You're the bravest person I've ever known." She smiled, though her heart was pounding with fear. "Sometimes courage needs a home," she echoed his words. "You gave me that. Now let me return the favor." Before he could respond, she slipped away into the darkness, making her way back up the slope and then eastward along the ridge. The saddle weighed heavily on her shoulder, but determination drove her forward. She deliberately made noise, snapping twigs, disturbing stones that clattered down the hillside. Behind her, she heard the pursuers change direction, following the trail of sound she left. A smile of grim satisfaction crossed her face as she led them farther from Daniel, from the ranch, from everything that had begun to feel like home. The chase continued through the night, Elena staying just ahead of her hunters, using every trick she knew to maintain distance while keeping them interested enough to follow. When the first light of dawn crept over the mountains, she found herself on unfamiliar ground, exhausted but triumphant. The voices behind her had faded hours ago. She had done it, she had led them away. Now she just had to find her way back to Pine Creek Ranch. Back to Daniel, who waited for her with eyes that saw her courage before she recognized it herself. Back to the place where, for the first time since her father died, she had felt truly seen. The rising sun painted the Montana sky in fierce oranges and pinks as Elena descended the unfamiliar hillside. Her shoulders ached from carrying the saddle, which she'd finally abandoned in a ravine after leading her pursuers far to the east. Her boots were scuffed and mud-caked, her dress torn at the hem. Every muscle in her body protested each step, but determination drove her forward. She had promised Daniel she would return. It was a promise she intended to keep. The terrain was challenging, rocky slopes giving way to thick stands of pine, streams that had to be forded carefully to avoid slipping on moss-covered stones. Elena paused atop a ridge, trying to get her bearings. In the distance, she could make out what might be the valley where Pine Creek Ranch lay, but it was still miles away. "One step at a time," she murmured to herself, her father's favorite saying when faced with a daunting task. One step at a time. By midday, the heat had become oppressive. Elena's throat was parched, her lips cracked from thirst. When she stumbled upon a clear stream bubbling between rocks, she fell to her knees beside it, drinking deeply of the cold mountain water. She splashed her face, the shock of it reviving her flagging spirits. As she rested in the shade of a pine, she found herself thinking of Daniel, his steady presence, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her, the gentle strength of his hands, the kiss they had shared in the cabin's moonlit stillness. It seemed impossible that she had known him for such a short time. Somehow, in the space of a few days, he had become essential to her. The thought gave her renewed energy. Rising to her feet, Elena continued westward, toward Pine Creek, toward home. The afternoon brought clouds that gathered ominously on the horizon. Elena eyed them warily, quickening her pace. The last thing she needed was to be caught in another storm, especially without shelter. As she crossed a small clearing, movement to her right caught her attention. She froze, heart hammering. A rider on horseback emerged from the trees, still some distance away but moving in her direction. Elena ducked back into the forest's edge, pressing herself against the rough bark of a pine. Had Harrington's men found her trail again? She held her breath as the rider drew closer. The horse was familiar, a bay gelding with a white blaze. And the rider, Daniel? Elena stepped out from her hiding place, scarcely believing her eyes. He reined in sharply, disbelief written across his features. "Elena!" In a fluid motion that belied his injured leg, he dismounted, crossing the distance between them in long strides. Elena ran to him, all exhaustion forgotten. They collided in the middle of the clearing, his arms encircling her waist, lifting her off her feet in a fierce embrace. She clung to him, her face buried in the crook of his neck, breathing in the scent of him, leather and pine and home. "You came looking for me," she whispered when he finally set her down, though he kept her close, as if afraid she might disappear again. "Of course I did." His voice was rough with emotion. One hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb gently brushing away a smudge of dirt. "Did you think I wouldn't?" Elena leaned into his touch. "I led them east like I promised, miles from the ranch, but I got turned around trying to find my way back." "You did more than that." Pride shone in Daniel's eyes. "Those men were found by the territorial marshal this morning. Apparently they stumbled into a camp of timber workers who didn't take kindly to armed strangers making threats." Relief washed over Elena. "They're arrested? Being held in Clearwater?" "Marshal Stevens came by the ranch first thing to tell us." Daniel's expression darkened. "Seems they were wanted men already. Hired guns with warrants out in Colorado and Wyoming." "And Harrington?" "No sign of him. But the marshal's asking questions. The men aren't talking yet, but Stevens thinks they will, in exchange for leniency." His hands tightened on her shoulders. "You're safe now, Elena. Truly safe." The weight of those words, the freedom they represented, made Elena's knees buckle. Daniel caught her, concern etching his features. "You're exhausted," he said, noticing for the first time her bedraggled state. "When's the last time you ate or slept?" "I don't remember," she admitted. There wasn't time for either. Without another word, Daniel lifted her onto his gelding, then mounted behind her, his arms creating a secure circle as he took the reins. Elena leaned back against his chest, allowing herself to relax for the first time in what felt like years. "Rest," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "I've got you now." As they rode toward Pine Creek Ranch, the threatening storm clouds began to dissipate, sunlight breaking through in golden shafts that illuminated the valley below. Elena drifted in and out of consciousness, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse's gait and the solid presence of Daniel behind her. She woke fully as they approached the ranch, the familiar buildings coming into view. Martha stood on the porch, hands shading her eyes as she watched their approach. When she recognized Elena, her face broke into a wide smile of relief. "Thank the Lord," she exclaimed as Daniel helped Elena dismount in the yard. "I've been worried sick about both of you." Martha enfolded Elena in a maternal embrace that brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "Come inside, child. You look like you've been through the wars." The kitchen was warm and fragrant with the smell of baking bread. Martha sat Elena at the table and bustled about, bringing her hot tea sweetened with honey, then a bowl of hearty stew that she insisted Elena eat, every last bite of. Daniel hovered nearby, unwilling to let Elena out of his sight even as he reported to his mother what the marshal had told him. "So it's over?" Martha asked when he finished. "Those men can't hurt Elena anymore?" "Not those particular men," Daniel confirmed. "But until we know for certain that Harrington has given up his pursuit." He left the sentence unfinished. Elena set down her spoon, suddenly unable to eat despite her hunger. "I've put you all in enough danger already. Perhaps it would be best if I moved on." "Absolutely not." Martha's tone brooked no argument. "You're staying right here where we can look after you, at least until you've recovered your strength." "And after that?" Elena couldn't stop herself from asking, looking directly at Daniel. Something shifted in his expression. Vulnerability replacing certainty. "That's for you to decide," he said quietly. "Pine Creek is your home for as long as you want it to be." Home. Such a simple word, yet it held worlds of meaning. Elena found herself unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Martha, sensing the current running between them, cleared her throat. "I think what Elena needs now is a hot bath and about 12 hours of sleep. The rest can wait." Later, clean and dressed in a fresh nightgown borrowed from Martha, Elena stood by the window of her room, the same room she'd woken in after the storm that had brought her to Pine Creek. The sun was setting, painting the western sky in fiery hues that reflected in the creek winding through the valley. A soft knock at the door drew her attention. "Come in," she called, expecting Martha with an extra blanket or some motherly advice about getting rest. Instead, Daniel entered, hesitating at the threshold, as if unsure of his welcome. "I wanted to check on you before you slept," he said. "Make sure you had everything you need." Elena smiled, warmth blooming in her chest at the sight of him. "I do, thank you." He nodded, seeming content just to look at her, standing there in the sunset's glow with her damp hair loose around her shoulders. "You should rest," he said finally, turning to go. "Daniel." His name fell from her lips like a prayer. "Stay." Just for a moment. He closed the door behind him, but remained near it, maintaining a respectful distance. "Elena, He stopped, seeming to struggle with what he wanted to say. "These past days, finding you in that storm, watching you fight to recover, seeing your courage when those men came." "You gave me courage," she said softly. "You and Martha, you offered me safety when I needed it most." Daniel shook his head. "No, the courage was always yours. You rode across half the country alone rather than surrender your freedom. You drew those men away from the ranch, risking yourself to protect us." His voice grew husky with emotion. "I've never met anyone like you, Elena Blackwood." She crossed the room to stand before him, close enough to see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, to count the faint lines etched at their corners. "Nor you, Daniel Wilson." His hand came up, hovering near her cheek as if he feared she might shatter at his touch. "I know it's too soon," he said, his voice low and earnest. "You've only just escaped one man's control. The last thing you need is another man making claims on your future." "Is that what you want to do?" Elena asked. "Make claims on my future?" "What I want." Daniel drew a deep breath. "What I want is to give you time, space to heal, to find your footing in this new life, to decide what you want, free from anyone else's expectations, including mine." The selflessness of his words touched Elena deeply. Here was a man who had everything she'd been taught to want: strength, courage, integrity, yet who asked for nothing except her happiness. "And if what I want is to stay," she whispered, "here at Pine Creek, with you and Martha." Hope flickered in his eyes, quickly tempered by caution. "You've only known us a short while. Once you're fully recovered, you might feel differently." "Perhaps." Elena smiled, reaching up to touch his face, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath her fingers. "But I don't think so." Daniel caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent shivers through her entire body. "Then stay," he said simply, "for as long as it feels right. No expectations, no obligations, just stay." "I will," she promised, and when he bent to kiss her, it felt like sealing a covenant. Not a cage, but a choice freely made. The days that followed took on a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural to Elena. She rose early with Martha and Daniel, helping prepare breakfast before the day's work began. As her strength returned, she took on more responsibilities: gathering eggs, tending the vegetable garden, learning to make cheese from the milk of Martha's small herd of dairy cows. In the evenings, they would gather in the main room, Daniel reading aloud from one of his father's books while Martha mended clothes and Elena learned to knit under the older woman's patient instruction. Sometimes they would simply talk, sharing stories of their lives before they'd met. Daniel spoke of his time in the war, haltingly at first, then with increasing openness as Elena and Martha listened without judgment. "I was so young," he confessed one night, staring into the fire. "Thought I was proving something by enlisting. Thought war would make me a man." A bitter smile crossed his face. "Instead, it nearly broke me." "But it didn't," Elena said gently. "You came home. You rebuilt your life. Thanks to Pa and Ma." Daniel glanced at his mother, who smiled sadly. "They never gave up on me, even when I'd given up on myself." Martha reached over to pat his hand. "That's what family does," she said simply. "Holds each other up when standing alone feels impossible." Family. The word resonated in Elena's heart. Was that what they were becoming? The three of them, bound not by blood but by choice, by mutual care and respect. As the summer progressed, Elena found herself venturing farther from the ranch, sometimes alone, sometimes with Daniel. He taught her to fish in the clear mountain streams, to identify edible plants in the forest, to shoot the rifle with increasing accuracy. "You're a natural," he remarked one afternoon, as she hit the target he'd set up for the third time in a row. "Steady hands, good eye." Elena lowered the rifle, a sense of accomplishment warming her. "My father taught me the basics when I was younger. He believed women should know how to protect themselves." Wise man. Daniel took the rifle, checking it was unloaded before storing it safely. "Though I hope you never need to use those skills." "So do I." Elena shaded her eyes, looking up at the brilliant blue sky. "But it feels good to know I could if necessary." On a golden afternoon in late August, they rode to the high meadow that had become their special place. The wildflowers were in full bloom, painting the landscape in vivid purples, yellows, and blues. They dismounted, letting the horses graze as they spread a blanket on the lush grass. Daniel had brought a surprise, a basket containing bread, cheese, dried apples, and a bottle of wine he'd purchased on his last trip to Clearwater. "Thought we should celebrate," he explained as he poured the ruby liquid into 2 tin cups. "Celebrate what?" Elena asked, accepting her cup. 2 months. He raised his cup in a toast. 2 months since you rode bareback through a storm and changed everything. Elena felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Has it been that long already?" "Feels like both forever and no time at all." Daniel's gaze was tender as it rested on her face. "You've brought something back to Pine Creek, Elena, something I didn't even realize was missing until you arrived." "What's that?" "Life." He gestured toward the valley spread below them. "Before, the ranch was just work. Necessary, important, but mechanical. I did what needed doing because it needed doing. Now," he searched for the right words, "now there's purpose again. Color. Hope." Elena's heart swelled with emotion. "I feel the same way. When I fled St. Louis, I was running away from something. I never expected to find something to run toward." They ate and talked as the afternoon waned, the conversation flowing easily between them. Elena found herself recounting stories from her childhood, happy memories of her parents, of school, of the life she'd had before everything changed. "Do you miss it?" Daniel asked. "Your old life?" Elena considered the question seriously. "I miss certain things. Books, music, some of the people, but no, I don't miss the life itself." She looked out over the valley, toward the ranch that had become her sanctuary. "This feels more real somehow, more honest." Daniel nodded, understanding without need for further explanation. "It's a hard life in some ways," he acknowledged. "Winters can be brutal. The work never really ends. And we're far from what some might call civilization." "Those aren't the things that matter most," Elena said softly. "No?" Daniel's eyes held hers. "What does matter most, Elena?" "Freedom," she answered without hesitation. "The space to make your own choices, forge your own path. And belonging. Finding people who see you for who you truly are and value that person." Daniel reached for her hand, his calloused fingers interlacing with her smaller ones. "I see you, Elena Blackwood," he said, his voice deep with feeling. "I've seen you from the first moment you collapsed at our door. Your courage, your intelligence, your kindness, your fire." Elena's breath caught in her throat. "And I see you, Daniel Wilson, your strength, your gentleness, your integrity. The man who carries others, burdens without complaint, who offers shelter without expectation of return." Something shifted in Daniel's expression, a decision made, a threshold crossed. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small object that caught the late afternoon sunlight. "This was my mother's," he said, opening his palm to reveal a simple gold band set with a single small pearl. "My father gave it to her when they decided to come west together, to build a new life." Elena's heart began to race, understanding dawning. "Daniel, I'm not asking for an answer today," he said quickly, "or tomorrow, or next week. I meant what I said about giving you time and space to decide your own future." He took a deep breath. "But I want you to know that when you're ready, If you're ever ready, there's a place for you here. Not as a guest or a friend, but as my wife, as my partner, in everything." Tears filled Elena's eyes, spilling over despite her efforts to contain them. Daniel looked stricken, mistaking her emotion for distress. "I've spoken too soon," he said, starting to withdraw his hand and the ring it held. "Please forget I—" "No." Elena caught his hand, holding it between both of hers. "It's not that. It's just—" She laughed through her tears. "I never thought I'd find this. Someone who wants me for myself, not for what I represent or what I can provide." Relief washed over Daniel's features. "Is that a yes?" "It's an— I need a little more time," Elena replied honestly. "Not because I don't know my feelings, but because this decision is too important to rush. Marriage should be entered with clear eyes and full hearts, don't you think?" Daniel's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I do think that," he agreed, "and I'll wait as long as you need." He pressed the ring into her palm, closing her fingers around it. "Keep this. Think about it. When you know your answer, whatever it is, I'll be here." They rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting, the world gilded in golden light. Martha was waiting on the porch, a telegram in her hand and an unreadable expression on her face. "This came for you, Elena," she said, holding out the yellow paper. "From the marshal in Clearwater." Elena dismounted quickly, her pulse quickening as she took the telegram. Daniel came to stand beside her, a silent support as she unfolded the paper and read the terse message. "Professor James Harrington arrested. Stop federal charges of fraud and embezzlement. Stop your testimony required. Stop. Please contact Marshal Stevens immediately. Stop." "What does it mean?" Martha asked, peering over Elena's shoulder. "It means Harrington's been arrested," Daniel explained. "Not for pursuing Elena, but for other crimes. Financial ones, by the sound of it." Elena read the telegram again, scarcely believing the words. "He always lived beyond his means," she said numbly. "I knew he was desperate for money. It's why he wanted to marry me off to that wealthy donor. But embezzlement—" "The marshal will want to speak with you," Daniel said gently. "Are you up for riding to Clearwater tomorrow?" Elena nodded, still processing the news. "Yes. I want this finished, once and for all." That night, sleep eluded her. Elena paced her room, alternating between relief that Harrington was finally facing justice and anxiety about confronting him again, even if only to give testimony. The small pearl ring lay on her bedside table, catching moonlight that streamed through the window. A soft knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Martha, wrapped in a faded robe, concern etched on her kind face. "Couldn't sleep?" the older woman asked. Elena shook her head. "Too much on my mind." Martha nodded understandingly. "Thought that might be the case. Come downstairs. I've made us some tea." In the kitchen, Martha poured steaming liquid into 2 cups, adding honey to both. They sat at the table in comfortable silence for a few moments, the only sound the ticking of the clock and the occasional creak of the house settling around them. "He asked you, didn't he?" Martha said finally. "Daniel, he asked you to marry him." Surprise flickered across Elena's face. "How did you know?" A smile touched Martha's lips. "I'm his mother. I know when my son is gathering his courage for something important. And I saw the way he looked at you when you came back from your ride today, like a man who's laid his heart bare and is still standing." "I didn't give him an answer," Elena admitted. "I asked for time. Wise of you." Martha approved. "Marriage isn't something to rush into, especially for a woman who's just reclaimed her independence." Elena toyed with her cup, gathering her thoughts. "It's not that I don't care for him. I do, more than I thought possible in such a short time. But you've been controlled by men your whole life," Martha finished for her. "First your father, then Harrington. You need to know that choosing Daniel wouldn't be exchanging one cage for another." "Yes," Elena whispered, grateful for the older woman's understanding. "Exactly that." Martha reached across the table to pat her hand. "Let me tell you something about my son. The war changed him, hardened him in some ways, broke him in others. When he came home, I feared he'd never truly heal. Her eyes grew distant with memory. But Daniel has always had a strength inside him, not just the physical kind, though the Lord knows he has plenty of that. It's a strength of character, of principle. I know, Elena said softly. I've seen it. What you may not have seen, Martha continued, is how you've changed him these past months. Brought back a light I thought was gone forever. She squeezed Elena's hand. He respects you, Elena. Values your mind, your spirit. He doesn't want to possess you. He wants to partner with you. I believe that, Elena said, and realized with some surprise that she truly did. But I need to finish this business with Harrington first. I need to know that chapter of my life is truly closed before I can begin a new one. Martha nodded approvingly. That's sensible. Daniel will understand. The journey to Clearwater the next morning was tense but uneventful. Daniel rode beside Elena, solid and reassuring, while Martha stayed behind to mind the ranch. As the small town came into view, Elena felt her resolve strengthen. Whatever awaited her there, she would face it with courage. The courage Daniel had recognized in her before she saw it in herself. Marshal Stevens met them at his office, a weathered man with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense manner. Miss Blackwood, he greeted her. Appreciate you coming in so promptly. What exactly has Professor Harrington been charged with? Elena asked, getting straight to the point. Embezzlement of university funds, primarily. Stevens replied. Been going on for years, apparently. The investigation started after he reported you missing. Seems your father had begun to suspect something wasn't right before he passed. Had notes in his office that the university discovered while looking into your disappearance. Elena felt a surge of pride in her father. Even in death, he was protecting her. Where is Harrington now? Federal marshals took him back to St. Louis yesterday. You won't have to face him today. Stevens glanced at Daniel, who stood protectively at Elena's side. What I need from you is a sworn statement about his behavior after your father's death. Anything that might help build the case against him. For the next hour, Elena detailed everything she could remember. Harrington's sudden interest in her father's papers after his death, his insistence on controlling every aspect of her inheritance, the suspicious depletion of funds that should have lasted years. He was desperate, she concluded. The arranged marriage was his attempt to solve his financial problems. I was just an asset to be leveraged. Stevens nodded grimly as he finished writing her statement. This helps, Miss Blackwood. Confirms what we suspected. The professor was living well beyond his means for years. When your father started asking questions about university finances, Harrington panicked. Will I need to testify in St. Louis? Elena asked, dreading the prospect of returning east. Possibly, Stevens admitted, but not for months yet. The federal prosecutor will contact you when and if it becomes necessary. He pushed the completed statement across the desk. Sign here, please. As Elena signed her name, a weight seemed to lift from her shoulders. Whatever happened next, Harrington no longer had power over her life. She was free, truly free, to choose her own path forward. Outside the marshal's office, Daniel waited until they were mounting their horses to speak. How do you feel? Elena considered the question, testing her emotions like pressing a bruise to see if it still hurt. Lighter, she said finally. Like I can breathe properly for the first time in months. Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. Ready to go home? Home. The word resonated through Elena's entire being. Yes, she thought as they rode side by side out of Clearwater, back toward Pine Creek Ranch. I'm ready to go home. And she knew, with sudden perfect clarity, what her answer to Daniel's proposal would be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.